The security guard at Ninoy Aquino International Airport had seen thousands of returning overseas workers, but nothing prepared him for what he witnessed in 2025. Wave after wave of Filipinos stepping off planes from America, not with the usual balikbayan boxes filled with gifts, but with deportation papers clutched in trembling hands. Children crying for fathers they might never see again, wives collapsing as they realized their American dream had become a nightmare. If you think this is just another immigration story, you're wrong. What's happening to Filipinos in America right now is unprecedented, systematic, and frankly shocking. Before we dive into the 9 cities that have essentially declared war on Filipino communities, smash that subscribe button because this story affects millions of families, and mainstream media isn't telling you the full truth. Let me start with a number that will make your blood run cold: 47,000. That's how many Filipinos were deported from just 9 American cities in 2025 alone. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of some Filipino cities, and we're only talking about 9 urban areas. Take Maria Santos, a 42-year-old mother of 3 who had been living in Seattle for 15 years. She worked as a medical technologist at Seattle Children's Hospital, paid her taxes religiously, and her eldest daughter was set to graduate as valedictorian from Roosevelt High School. On a Tuesday morning in March, immigration officers knocked on her door. By Thursday, she was on a plane to Manila, leaving behind her life, her children's futures, and a mortgage she'd been paying for a decade. Maria's story isn't unique, it's part of a pattern. But here's what's truly disturbing. This isn't just random immigration enforcement. What's happening is targeted, coordinated, and it's changing the face of Filipino America forever. Let's start with Seattle, the city that launched what many are calling the Great Filipino Exodus of 2025. The Emerald City, once home to thriving Filipino communities in Beacon Hill and the International District, became ground zero for what authorities termed H-1B visa compliance audits. Sounds bureaucratic, doesn't it? Until you realize that 73% of those audited were Filipino tech workers. Carlos Mendoza thought his job at Microsoft was secure. He'd been with the company for 8 years, led 3 successful product launches, and his manager had just approved his promotion to senior software architect. Carlos had done everything right. He'd married his college sweetheart, bought a house in Bellevue, and his 2 young children spoke English with American accents. Then came the audit. Within 6 weeks, Carlos discovered his H-1B visa had been retroactively deemed fraudulent due to what officials called discrepancies in educational credentials. The discrepancy? His university in Manila had changed its name 5 years after he graduated, creating what immigration lawyers later called a paperwork trap. Carlos had 30 days to leave the country. His wife and children, both American citizens, faced an impossible choice: split the family or abandon their American lives. But Seattle was just the beginning of something much larger and more sinister. Houston, the energy capital of America, became the second city to systematically target Filipino workers, but their approach was different. Instead of tech visas, they went after the maritime industry, where Filipinos had built their reputation as some of the world's most skilled seafarers and offshore workers. Rosa de la Cruz had spent 20 years climbing the ranks at Shell Oil. Starting as a junior engineer, she'd worked her way up to platform supervisor, overseeing safety protocols for deepwater drilling operations. Her expertise was so valued that Shell had sponsored her entire family's immigration, and she'd become a mentor to dozens of young Filipino engineers entering the industry. The crackdown came during what officials called Operation Safe Waters, supposedly designed to ensure all offshore workers met the highest safety standards. In reality, it became a systematic review of every Filipino worker's credentials, work history, and family connections. Rosa discovered that her 20-year career meant nothing when immigration officials decided her original maritime certification from the Philippines didn't meet current standards, despite the fact that she'd been working successfully under the same certification for 2 decades. Within 6 months, Houston had deported over 8,000 Filipino maritime workers and their families. The oil platforms that had depended on Filipino expertise suddenly faced critical staffing shortages, but that didn't slow down the deportation machine. The psychological impact on the Filipino community was devastating. Families who had built their entire lives around the American dream watched helplessly as their neighbors disappeared overnight. Children stopped talking about their future careers, afraid that mentioning their Filipino heritage might somehow mark their families for deportation. Things got even worse when the crackdown reached New York City, and this is where the story takes a truly disturbing turn. New York's approach targeted the one group of Filipino workers that Americans had come to depend on most: healthcare professionals. The irony was breathtaking. These were the same Filipino nurses who had worked double shifts during the COVID pandemic, who had held the hands of dying patients when their families couldn't visit, who had been called heroes just a few years earlier. Dr. Amanda Reyes embodied this contradiction perfectly. She'd been working in Mount Sinai's intensive care unit for 12 years, had received commendations for her work during the pandemic, and had saved countless lives with her expertise in critical care. Her colleagues considered her indispensable, and her patients' families regularly wrote letters thanking her for her compassion and skill. The targeting of healthcare workers wasn't accidental. Immigration officials began scrutinizing every aspect of Filipino medical professionals' credentials, questioning nursing degrees that had been accepted for decades, and creating new bureaucratic hurdles that seemed designed specifically to trap Filipino healthcare workers. Dr. Reyes discovered her medical license was under review when she arrived at work one morning to find her hospital ID deactivated. The reason? Questions about the equivalency of her Philippine medical education, despite the fact that she'd passed all American medical examinations, completed her residency at Johns Hopkins, and had been practicing successfully for over a decade. The hospital fought to keep her, her colleagues protested, and her patients' families wrote letters to immigration officials. None of it mattered. Dr. Reyes was deported 3 months later, leaving behind not just her career, but patients who depended on her specialized care. The pattern was becoming clear, but it was about to get much worse. Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world, launched its own quiet purge of Filipino creative professionals. This wasn't the dramatic, headline-grabbing enforcement you might expect. Instead, it was a subtle strangulation of the Filipino creative community that had contributed so much to American entertainment. Filipino directors, editors, visual effects artists, and musicians found their work visas subject to sudden, routine reviews that stretched for months. Projects were delayed, careers stalled, and families lived in constant fear of deportation. The entertainment industry, which had long prided itself on diversity and inclusion, watched silently as some of its most talented contributors disappeared. The economic impact rippled through Filipino communities across Los Angeles, from the sound stages of Hollywood to the editing suites of Burbank. Families who had built their lives around the entertainment industry found themselves blacklisted not for any wrongdoing, but simply for being Filipino. But if you think the corporate world would protect their Filipino employees, Chicago proved that assumption tragically wrong. Chicago's approach was perhaps the most cold-blooded of all. Major corporations, under pressure from what sources describe as federal compliance initiatives, began systematically terminating Filipino employees on various pretexts, then reporting them to immigration authorities. Miguel Torres had been with Boeing for 25 years. He'd started on the assembly line and worked his way up to senior quality control inspector, a position that required security clearance and complete trust from the company. Miguel had been instrumental in identifying safety issues that prevented potential disasters, and his colleagues respected his meticulous attention to detail. Boeing terminated Miguel on a Friday afternoon, citing restructuring needs. By Monday morning, immigration officers were at his door with deportation orders. The timing wasn't coincidental. Miguel later learned that Boeing, along with several other major Chicago corporations, had received guidance about reviewing the employment status of foreign workers, with particular attention paid to Filipino employees. The corporate betrayal cut deep into Chicago's Filipino community. Families who had believed that hard work and loyalty would protect them discovered that decades of service meant nothing when political winds changed. San Francisco's tech industry, which had built its success on global talent, proved equally willing to sacrifice its Filipino workforce. The city that preached inclusion and diversity quietly implemented what insiders called the adjustment, a systematic reduction of Filipino tech workers across major companies. Startup founders who had built successful companies saw their investor visas canceled. Software engineers who had created breakthrough technologies found themselves unemployed and facing deportation. The very industry that had been built on the idea that talent knows no borders suddenly decided that some borders mattered more than others. Miami took a different approach, targeting the service industry that kept the city's tourism economy running. Filipino restaurant workers, hotel managers, and hospitality professionals who had been essential to Miami's reputation for excellent service found themselves swept up in raids that seemed designed more for intimidation than enforcement. Elena Rodriguez had built a restaurant empire in Miami over 15 years, employing over 200 people and contributing millions to the local economy. Her restaurants were featured in travel guides, beloved by locals, and had become gathering places for the Filipino community. Immigration officers shut down all 3 locations in a single day, arresting Elena and dozens of her employees on what they called document irregularities. The raids weren't just enforcement actions, they were psychological warfare designed to terrorize the entire Filipino community. Families stopped eating at Filipino restaurants, afraid of being caught up in raids. Children stopped speaking Tagalog in public, terrified that their language might mark them as targets. Phoenix targeted the construction industry, where skilled Filipino workers had built much of the city's recent development. The timing was particularly cruel, coming just as these workers had completed major projects that defined the city's skyline. Their reward for building America was deportation from America. But the most shocking revelation came from Dallas, and this is where the full scope of what's happening becomes clear. Dallas targeted Filipino professionals in banking and finance, but the deportations revealed something that changed everything we thought we knew about this crisis. Internal documents, leaked by whistleblowers within the immigration system, showed that the 9-city crackdown wasn't random enforcement or even overzealous local officials. It was coordinated federal policy, implemented quietly and systematically across multiple cities, designed to reduce Filipino immigration and presence in key American industries. The documents revealed target numbers for each city, specific industries to focus on, and even guidelines for creating legal pretexts for deportation. The human cost of this policy has been staggering. Children separated from parents, families destroyed, careers ended, and communities scattered. But perhaps the most tragic aspect is how it's changed Filipino Americans' relationship with the country they'd considered home. Second- and third-generation Filipino Americans, citizens by birth, now live in fear that their heritage makes them targets. Filipino American students avoid mentioning their ethnicity on college applications. Filipino American businesses remove Filipino flags and cultural symbols from their storefronts. The psychological impact extends far beyond those directly affected. The message has been received loud and clear by Filipino communities across America. You are not welcome here, regardless of your contributions, your loyalty, or your love for this country. As we reach the end of 2025, the question isn't just about immigration policy or even about Filipino families. The question is about what kind of country America wants to be. The systematic targeting of one of the most successful, law-abiding, and integrated immigrant communities in America should concern everyone who believes in fairness, justice, and the American dream. The 47,000 Filipinos deported from these 9 cities aren't just statistics. They're teachers who educated American children, nurses who saved American lives, engineers who built American infrastructure, and entrepreneurs who created American jobs. Their deportation doesn't make America safer or more prosperous, it makes America smaller and meaner. But here's what really keeps me up at night thinking about this story. If this can happen to Filipinos, one of the most successful immigrant communities in America, what does that mean for every other immigrant community? What does it mean for the 4 million Filipino Americans who are watching their friends and family members disappear? And what does it mean for America's future when the country systematically expels the very people who have contributed so much to its success? The deportation machine rolls on, families continue to be separated, and communities continue to live in fear. The only question remaining is whether Americans will wake up to what's happening before it's too late to stop it. If this story affected you, if you know someone who's been impacted, Or if you believe this systematic targeting is wrong, I need you to do something. Share this video, tell people what's really happening, and make sure that these 47,000 stories don't get forgotten. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because mainstream media isn't telling you these stories, and someone needs to bear witness to what's happening to our Filipino friends and neighbors. Are Filipinos no longer welcome in America? Is this the end of one of the great American immigration success stories? Tell me what you think in the comments below, because this conversation is just getting started.